freedom, the land of the setting sun, with countless human colors. Africa is where we're from. We've had our highs, had our lows. The path of victory is what we chose. We did shine our eyes, they blow our nose. We are the future, and everybody knows this is the African way. The African way, the African way, the African way.
So, welcome to episode 2 of the African Way podcast with me, Yemi. Hopefully this will not be a long video. So just bear with me. This is a new thing for me. So our topic today is removing the influence of Europe and America and Asia as well from Africa. So that's broad, but really what I'm trying to say is that we have a lot of influence from outside parties in telling us on the continent what we should do, down to the type of things that we should grow, the type of industries that we should be in, etc. And there, to a point, it's actually prohibitive. It's as if you only get to do the bare minimum of what they cannot do because they want you to provide that to them, and anything else that you could possibly do to help yourself grow, they don't want you to do. So that is the topic for today, and it is something I have spoken about privately, with my brother and other people, but it became something that pissed me off yesterday, because of personal business that I'm trying to do, and something that I found out is against the law here in Liberia, which is absolutely absurd to me, and it really pissed me off. So that's where this topic came from. So I'll say this: I feel like African leaders need to kind of grow some cojones, grow some balls, and start to stand up for what we need on this continent. And now, take away the conversation about corruption and taking small amounts of money instead of seeing the whole bigger picture of what industrialization and investing in our own countries here can do for us. They need to grow some balls. And from an example I can give of that is in Ghana. I watched a documentary about tomato farming in Ghana, and how that was a very lucrative thing in Ghana before, but it has become less and less lucrative because of the fact that they're doing a lot of importing of canned tomato paste and processed tomato products from China and places such as that. So they're in the documentary, they talk about how they closed down factory that they have that could produce the same products because of the fact that they just can't compete with the pricing of the products that come from places like China. And there's reasons for why you can't compete and things like that. If you read the description on some of the cans of tomato paste that comes from China, you'll see on the label, it will tell you that it's only 30 or 40% tomato. So what's the other 70%? That is all filler and things that they put in there. So now how can you compete with somebody who's putting fake things in the food compared to somebody who's not? And instead of the government to put in place some measures to make it more competitive, where where like the Chinese products can just flood the market and take away all of the business from the local people. Instead of doing things like that, such as maybe adding tariffs, etc., the governments are afraid to do that because they're afraid of retaliatory activities, which the reality is sometimes when some of our countries do try to stand up, or even any third world country tries to stand up to one of these world powers, they do get retaliated against, whether it be tariffs or it's a whole wide range of things. But there is retaliatory activity. But the reality is, on this continent, we provide the world with a lot of raw materials and other things. The world needs us. The world needs us. And if we were to industrialize here and we were to start producing and manufacturing things here on the continent, which I know takes a lot of investment to do, but if we were to do that, we would not need these other countries. And they know that, so they have a stake in keeping us where we are. But our governments need to stand up and do some things, because the reality is some of the things that I'm going to say are restricted for us to do on this continent and in some of our countries are things that were recommended by Europe and America that we restrict, or organizations like the UN or the IMF that give recommendations about banning and prohibiting certain activities. And it's like, what gives them the right to tell us what we should and should not do here on our own continent? So moving on, just to list a few things. I didn't have time to put together way too many things, because sometimes doing research here, at least in Liberia, you can't find everything on the internet all the time. Sometimes you're never going to find a complete listing of information, because I went to look for the list of prohibited or exports from Liberia, and I could not find it on the internet. It's something that you would have to go find the right person who's going to give you that information. So, to give a couple examples of things that are not right, one would be I was in a conversation one time with a lawyer when we were discussing the ECOWAS brown card issue, and the lawyer brought up the fact that it's illegal for Liberian people to sell fish to Europeans, something like that. And it's ironic that that's something that's actually within the law, that Liberians cannot export fish and etc. to Europe. But European vessels come into Liberian waters and they take fish from the waters. So you're saying that the country cannot make money supplying you something, but yet you come into the waters and you steal. That isn't right. But who is going to stand up to them and remove that as the case? Because that is stealing. Then charcoal, okay? I found out that it is illegal to export charcoal from Liberia. This I found out because I'm in this business. And that made me angry yesterday because I was trying to get quotations for how much it would cost to ship containers and move into the exporting space. And I find out that it's illegal. So it's ironic that it's illegal to export charcoal, but one of Liberia's largest exports is wood chips or timber. Now, what are they doing with this timber that is being exported? Pretty sure maybe in some cases is kind of things that you wouldn't find in stores like Home Depot when you want to do your home improvement things. But probably a good portion of that is also being sold on to some manufacturers that are going to take that and make it into charcoal on their own. So you're banning something that is very simple and very basic. For what reason? Now, some of the reasons out there is that, oh, there's pirating and pirates steal those kind of things and etc. But still, there's no good excuse for banning the export of charcoal. That is not like a drugs and weapons kind of thing. It's a very basic thing, and you have countries like Germany and Europe that actually do a lot of importing of charcoal. And even in the Middle East, they import a lot of charcoal as well. And even I think Nigeria has its bouts about like banning and not banning it. But Nigeria is actually maybe, I want to say, the 14th, or they have a large stake in the exporting of charcoal business, especially in Africa. Nigeria is like they almost in that business there themselves alone. So that I just don't find it to be okay. Next, world summits about like global warming. There's always a big push to tell Africans not to do deforestation, not to cut down trees, um, and a whole other lot of things that can make you angry. But I find it to be extremely problematic, and the reason why is this: the United States and a lot of the European countries and Asia, etc. They've had their like industrial revolutions. Africa has not. So when you tell us here, don't cut down your trees, leave the forest alone, how do you expect people to ever have more modern cities and towns if they don't cut down one tree? You have to do that. I'm not saying that we should go and cut down everything, but the reality is we need to industrialize on this continent if we're ever going to get better. If we're going to just remain the way that we are and just always being exploited, then fine, we can stay the way that we are. But walk around and see. You have some major cities in a lot of these countries that they look pretty modern, or they're pretty fine. But you can't look at maybe being in Monrovia or being in Lagos or being in Accra. You can't look at being in those places as if that's what every single city or town in in each country looks like. That's not really even true. And even some people, like someone said to me when I was on a flight with a fellow Nigerian person who came here to do some work. He said that Monrovia looks to him like what he would expect a village to look like, not the capital city. So, how do you expect us to industrialize? How do you expect us to improve technology? How do you expect us to get anywhere near the same level of what somebody's daily life is like in Europe if we don't cut down some trees? So, it's like sometimes they have these arguments that they want to make as to why they justify what they're telling us to do on the continent. But the reality is that it also serves their agenda of keeping us held back. Now, the reality is as well, Africa has some of the lowest emissions in several categories in the entire world, even with things like waste management. Waste management is a huge issue on the continent, but you know what? Even I forget what organization it was that did this paper, but there was like a published document that talked about the average human being's waste and the average human being waste on different continents. Africa actually has the lowest. And the reason why is probably also because of disparity in wealth and poverty as well. Because reality is the more money that you have, the more waste that you consume. Because probably someone who has very little is not wasting their food, not wasting that much. So but we actually have some of the lowest waste, some of the lowest emissions in the world here. So to tell us that we need to not cut down any trees, we need to be deforesting, we're hurting the environment. The reality is that we are not the ones doing that. I know the world is all connected in its own way. What happens in the desert, in the Sahara Desert, affects what happens in the Amazon rainforest and etc. And it is that may be true, but we are not the ones that are creating the majority of the pollution. And if we're not the ones that are doing that, we shouldn't be held responsible for keeping the rest of the trees that are existing in the world alive. We here need to industrialize. We here need to do manufacturing. We here need to start growing our own crops more. We here need to be less dependent on everybody else. And we can't do that without standing up to some of these things that the other world powers are trying to tell us that we should do. So I think to kind of start to round up my one of my last points will be this. Outside of our leaders in our country stepping up, I think that our developmental organizations need to stand to take a stand and care more as well. Now, a lot of these organizations do have influence from other countries, like the African Development Bank has a whole listing of its partnerships, and it is not just African countries. But the reality is sometimes when they say they're doing development, when they're investing in projects, it doesn't feel genuine to me that they want to see development all the time. And here's the reason why I say this. I'll use an example here in Liberia. Some years ago, there was some funding that was given to improve rice farming somewhere in rural Liberia. And they wrote an article that they have it on their website, and you can read it, and it boasts about how they took the people from one harvest to 2 harvests a year and from 1 ton per hectare to 3. Now, for me, that's upsetting to read such a thing. Why? Because when I look and did my own research, I find that the average farmer can reach yields of like somewhere between 4 and 6, really 5 and 6, okay, tons per hectare. So, and if you are able to hit really, really high optimal yields, you can get up to 8, 9. So you can't write an article boasting about how you're helping develop when you took somebody from below average to below average. You should at least bring somebody up to average. But if we're doing things like that and saying that we're investing in development on the continent, but we're not even setting ourselves up to be in the pool of average, world average, then what are you really doing? You're just making it look like you're investing in something, and the reality is that you're just wasting money. Maybe because you want to make sure that you keep the budget that is allotted to you every year for spending. So outside of that, my last point is that I think it takes for us to make a lot more entrepreneurial effort as people in Africa and Africans in the diaspora, find a way that you can do business, and not always just in the typical ways. We have doctors, we have scientists, we have lawyers, we have financial professionals, we have actors, actresses, we have people who know how to invent and create things. And this I know because around the world, a lot of inventions and things come from us. They don't come from us on our continent. They come from us far away. We need to be able to do things that are going to be able to recycle wealth within our nations. We need to do that where it gets to a point that we don't need them. And we need to do things that are going to help us start to be able to manufacture. And we need to invest in Black and African owned businesses and banks and things like that so that we can be the ones to invest when it comes to like projects that you know will be successful instead of having to go back and beg for money from people and nations who really don't want us to do anything. Because the reality is, what they allow us to do is what they know is going to benefit them and what they want that they can't produce themselves. So, thank you for tuning in and stay blessed.